Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for our Ideas Forum on how federal funding cuts are and other policies are affecting higher education. I'm Julie Niles with the League of Women Voters of Naperville. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items. Please mute your microphone or audio if you haven't already to help prevent random sounds from popping into the presentation. And please put any comments or questions you have in the chat, as we'll have a brief Q&A at the end of the program, and my league associate, Julie Kulak, will be helping me keep track of those comments and questions. Also, please be aware that any comments or questions you put in the chat will be recorded as this program is being recorded. So let's talk about the program. Back in February, the federal government cut funding and grants to research institutions, including universities across the United States. Also around that time, the federal immigration agents became quite active in the Chicago metro area. So how did these funding cuts impact labs? How do they impact research? How do federal agents in communities where students and their families live impact faculty-student relations? Also, when DEI becomes, the rules of the game for DEI have changed. What does that do to the school environment? Well, tonight we're fortunate to have with us two professors from the University of Illinois at Chicago. Dr. Coe is professor of Kinesiology and Nutrition at UIC's College of Applied Health Science, and Dr. Hebert-Beirne is professor of Community Health Sciences at UIC School of Public Health. So welcome, Dr. Coe and Dr. Hebert-Beirne. We're glad to have you here tonight.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen here. Here we go. Okay. So, hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. I know this is a busy time of year, and it's really appreciate you taking some time out to spend time with us to hear about impact of cuts to research funding that's happened over the past year. I'm Tim Coe. I'll speak for about 20 minutes, hopefully, and then Jeni Hebert-Beirne my colleague, will speak for the remaining time before we open up for questions. So I'm a professor at UIC. I've been at UIC for 25 years. It's hard to believe. And just in the past year, as a response to everything that's been going on, I joined a group called Stand Up for Science. It's a national organization, and Jeni and I are founding members of the Chicago chapter of Stand Up for Science. in response, again, to everything that's been happening this year. Want to kind of emphasize that opinions that I'm going to share today are my own, don't represent those opinions of those organizations. So I'd like to start out today to talk about the power of NIH funding and its impact on kind of our understanding of disease and health. It's the largest public funder of biomedical research in the world. It's really made funding from the NIH has made the United States a leader, or the leader, in biomedical research and advancing medical science. Illinois has received $1.3 billion funding in 2024. And I'll talk about kind of where that's going to the different institutions. NIH-funded research has been a big factor in the drop in cancer mortality over the past few years and to reducing deaths from heart disease. It supports more than 400,000 jobs across the country at more than 25 institutions, so it's a major employer in most states. It funds basic research that spurs further development of drugs that are developed by the U.S. biomedical industry. amazing kind of statistic that 99% of all new drugs developed over the past couple of decades have received NIH funding. So NIH funds the basic research that kind of seeds the idea for developing drugs, and then the pharmaceutical industry takes over the development aspect of those. And it's been estimated that for every dollar that's invested, NIH-funded research generates $2.50 in economic activity. So it's not only important for understanding and treating disease, it's also an economic driver. So when we talk about what happens in the state of Illinois, there's 400 million funding for Northwestern, over 200 million for University of Chicago, almost 200 million for our institution, University of Illinois, Chicago. So these are the big three NIH-funded institutions in the state, obviously all in the Chicago area. Is very important for training the medical workforce. And so there's a lot of money goes into training grants at all these different institutions to train the next generation of researchers. And all of that has kind of been put at risk this year. It's also something that people might not know is that there's a granting system called the Small Business Development Grants that seed money to small businesses, startup businesses, to take technologies that are developed at universities and to make businesses out of them. So they kind of help bridge that gap between discoveries at the university to the big pharmaceutical companies. So what happened this year, beginning in January, as soon as the new administration kind of took office, they released or employed a number of different strategies to influence funding for scientific research, executive actions, installation of political appointees in these various institutions, and starting immediately, there was a freeze on all funding for research. There was a ban on communication. So we had no idea what was going on. We just knew everything had come to a stop back in early February. All of these cuts have resulted in funding cuts for NIH, NSF, CDC, so pretty much all federal departments or institutes that fund research. There's been a tremendous loss of expert personnel amongst all of these institutes, and a lot of uncertainty for the people that remain. In the current funding year, both NIH and NSF have funded 25% fewer grants across pretty much all disciplines, but we'll look in the next slide at which ones our disciplines are hardest hit. And the current administration's budget proposes a 40% cut in funding, so they want to do even more. The downstream effects of all these cuts are going to be to dramatically affect and impair advances in science, development of new drugs, and training of the next generation of scientists. So here's kind of some numbers in terms of decreasing grants in 2025 that have been funded compared to the previous 10 years. So minority health has been dramatically, most severely affected, but also nursing, alcohol abuse, mental health, aging, diabetes, all have been significantly affected. Pretty much anything you can think of has had cuts associated with it. In addition, anybody that's lucky enough to get a grant has received new stipulations for their grants. And one very recent one is a stipulation that any grant can be terminated if the agency, meaning NIH, determines that the award no longer effectuates the program goals or agency priorities. This kind of wording is popping up in all sorts of funding kind of notices of awards. And essentially, this isn't normal, this is new. And this means that if the leadership who are politically appointed now determines that it's not in the interest of leadership, that they can cut the grant at any time. And again, this is not normal. The second stipulation that's been added to a lot of new grants basically says that any NIH funds cannot be used to support any DEI related activities. And they have examples of these different activities. These are plans that had been kind of instituted for new grants to try to enhance the diversity of the workforce in research over the past couple of years, and now they're reversing course and banning any kind of mention of these things. Jeni is going to talk a lot more about kind of all the words that are not allowable anymore to use in your proposals. Another thing that in some ways sounds kind of innocuous is a unified NIH funding strategy to guide consistent, clear award decisions. It it's not doesn't make things clear at all. It states funding again should ally with NIH's mission. Some things that kind of make total sense, but were already done anyway. So prioritizing scientific merit, integrating breadth of topics, consider investigators' career stage, promote broad distribution and geographic balance of funding. the, the, the the big issue here, I think, is aligning with NIH's mission, and they're kind of elevating the opinion or the influence of leadership in making these decisions. So it was mentioned before that, we were going to address some about the impact of immigration, changes that have been happening, kind of attacks on, bringing in people from outside the U.S. to do research in the U.S. It's been, up until now, people from around the world, were very interested in coming to the U.S. to receive research training. This is where they could receive the best training and had access to the best kind of labs. So we attracted the best and brightest scientists from around the world. And I don't have numbers, but a big proportion of these people will stay in the U.S., contribute to the U.S. enterprise, research enterprise. I've had a number of people from around the world in my lab, and the vast majority, I'd say 90% of them, have stayed in the U.S. and have done a lot of great science here in the U.S. Right now, changes to the immigration processes are severely impacting both current and potential non-U.S. citizen trainees. I have a woman in my lab right now who's terrified of kind of what's happening and her ability to stay in and complete her job in the U.S. It changes to all different visa programs, H-1B in particular, are likely going to lead trainees to avoid the U.S. And there's already a number of kind of articles coming out, some data starting to appear that that scientists from outside the U.S. are not coming to the U.S. anymore and choosing other countries, in particular China. So some data to support all that. The number of new first-time international grad students fell by 15% in the last year, contributing to 17% also overall reduction. DePaul in Chicago reported a 62% drop, and that led to spending cuts and hiring freeze at DePaul. This is happening all across the country. And, our ability to, impaired ability to attract international students is going to harm the entire research enterprise. And also, the development of kind of new medical technologies that are going to help us in the future. I'll close with the lack of response of our universities and other research institutions to the problem. Um, Beginning of February, a number of us in the research faculty kind of saw what was happening and were alarmed and were waiting for the university administrations to speak out. And this is happening mostly across the country at most institutions. When we didn't hear anything happening, we started to inquire what's going on. And we started to organize ourselves. The union has been very good in addressing the situation or trying to, Jeni and I joined Stand Up for Science to try to kind of speak out about these things. But there's really been a disappointing lack of response in general from all institutions, including UIC. Very recently, there was a directive from leadership at UIC saying that they were going to get rid of kind of promotion and tenure kind of considerations for DEI, and that scholarships and hiring programs that had anything to do with diversity, equity, inclusion, they were going to get rid of, and that that this was going to happen very rapidly. And I think we got notice of this maybe 6 weeks ago, and this was supposed to take place December 8th. The union has been pushing back, has kind of won some concessions, but it's an uphill fight. And I think that ends my comments, and I think it's a good jumping off place for Jeni's comments, who's more directly involved in areas that have been under attack. So thank you for your attention. I'll pass it off to Jeni.
Thanks, Tim. Just checking that you can hear me okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we're good.
Awesome. Okay, great. And I'm taking over Tim's sharing. Okay. You can see my slides okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for having Tim and I here tonight. So as Tim said, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about my research and how my research has been impacted as a way of trying to characterize the significance of what's happening with research funding at the federal government. So my name is Jeni Hebert-Beirne. I'm a faculty member in the School of Public Health at UIC in the Division of Community Health Sciences. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the kind of work that I do. It's different than Tim's. My work is not lab-based. I work with people and neighborhoods. So I'm a community health scientist, so I think a lot about building health at the neighborhood level. And so these attacks on diversity, equity, inclusion are really relevant to my research. I'm also a founding member of Stand Up for Science, and we really appreciate any opportunity to talk about this. So again, just thank you for taking time to hear us out. And these are my opinions. So I also have been at UIC for 25 years, either as a student or a faculty member. I want to say I love working at UIC. I love working at our public research university in Chicago. I'm one of those people who loves her job. I do research that's called community-based participatory research. So this is research that is done in partnership with people who are most impacted by whatever is under investigation. And so I'm going to give you 2 examples of the kinds of work that I do. I do work funded by the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health that really focuses on the health of workers. And in particular, I'm interested in workers who are engaged in work that is precarious, that can be harmful to their physical, emotional health, or even their economic health. The people who are engaged in work that is precarious happen to be people of color, women, and people who speak a language other than English. And so for 10 years, we've had a grant from the National Institutes of Occupational Safety and Health to work with workers to try to identify what in their work situation is modifiable, or what's modifiable also in kind of the environment. So how can we foster healthier work situations? So that's one of the things that I do. Another thing that I do using this community-based participatory research approach is I'm interested in how the environment impacts one's health. So we often talk about how where you live, work, play, pray, age impact your health. And public health, that's really our lens. So I'm interested in how the environment impacts people's health. And so that kind of research is really a research that's called environmental justice. So this is exposure science, where we're really interested in are people exposed to environmental hazards, and how does that impact their health? One of the things that we research in environmental justice research is cumulative impact. So often someone isn't just exposed to one hazard, but multiple hazards, and then they accumulate. I'm also a community engagement scientist. So because I do research in partnership with community members and community-based organizations, I'm interested in that science of partnering. And this is all relevant to sharing a little bit about my story. I wanted to say I have funding from multiple institutes within the NIH, and Tim did a really nice job of kind of painting a picture of the NIH. So I have funding from the NIDDK. This is the digestive diseases and kidney diseases. NIEHS, which is Environmental Health Sciences. I have funding from the National Institute for Child Health and Human Development. I have funding from the National Science Foundation. This is what Tim also mentioned. And then I just want to distinguish, also at the federal level, I have funding from the Centers for Disease Control. And in particular, that funding for occupational health comes from the Centers for Disease Control. And I just wanted to kind of point that out to talk a little bit about how this has been impacting my research. So I think the reason why I wanted to kind of lay out what community-based participatory research is to say that this executive order that was issued January 20th, which calls for the elimination of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, has been applied to research in this area of injustices. And so I just wanted to take a second to kind of talk that through for a bit. So this is an executive order that stops work that is referred to as immoral discrimination. This is work that was held up by the previous administration to attend to the fact that people don't all share the same experiences, that often where you live, work, play, pray, or work is influenced by who you are. So often, we say place matters, whether you live on the far southeast side of Chicago, which experiences a lot of environmental hazards, or you live kind of in the center of Chicago in Lincoln Park. You have very different exposures and very different health outcomes. And so this work that looks at people most impacted is being called work that is around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so it can be kind of complicated. It's certainly complicated for me. But the idea is that this executive order says that if you're paying attention to some people and not all people, that's discriminating to all people. And so the idea is you can't just focus on people on the far southeast side who we know scientifically have extra exposures, have cumulative extra exposures. You really have to focus on all people. And so this executive order calls for the determination of all discriminatory programs and call the work really illegal, diversity, equity, inclusion. And included in that is environmental justice. So environmental justice research is something that has been happening for quite a long time, a couple of decades, where we've really tried to use the scientific process to answer questions about exposures. How are people exposed? How does it impact their health outcomes? And importantly, as a public health researcher, how do we make sure that we have healthy conditions for all? So I think this is one of the things that is causing a lot of confusion, because people like me who focus on vulnerable populations or people who are having an extreme experience with, for example, opportunity for work, That is trying to improve the conditions for them so that it improves the conditions for all. So that there is a bit of confusion, I think, about the application of this idea of illegal diversity, equity, and inclusion on research. So just to tell you a little bit about how I've experienced this, because I do work that involves the community, I have a lot of programs that build the capacity of the community to engage in research. This is probably not a surprise, but not everyone is interested in research. And we often enter into communities that are having, for example, the highest rates of diabetes or the highest rates of heart disease. And we say, we'd really like to engage in community-based participatory research because it improves the quality of the science when we have someone who really understands their own experience at the table. And so my work that is involved in building the capacity of the community to engage in research is some of the research that's being cut. So I have a community scientist certificate program. So this is working with community members to train them in the scientific process so that they can sit on research teams like mine or Tim's. So that has been cut because that has been perceived as violating this DEI executive order. In my environmental justice work, one of the things that we do is we bring scientists on what the community partners call toxic tours. And these are tours of the neighborhood to show the concerns that community members have so that they may not have the scientific evidence that this industry, for example, is causing higher rates of cancers, but they have a concern. And so we call these toxic tours. These have been cut out of my research. And I think it's because it is centering kind of people who are marginalized perceptions or experiences at the table. But I'm not really sure. There's a lot of kind of uncertainty about this. I have a program that trains environmental justice fellows. So these are individuals, again, who live in environmental justice communities to be scholars, and that has been cut. And then often just the words, and my next slide is just going to show you some of the words, but anything that involves the word equity, diverse, justice is being cut out of grants, and then the funding goes with it too. So I've lost people, I've lost programs. I also have a CDC-funded youth public health academy, so high school students across the city, and it's a career development program to get young people excited about public health. Not everyone's excited about public health either. This was recently cut because the CDC funding was perceived to be a DEI program. And then I have at the bottom of the slide, I just wanted to show an example. Sometimes what's happening is our research proposals are being scanned using AI or some kind of mining system, and things are cut that don't really make a lot of sense. So this is an example. In research studies, you typically have 2 or 3 aims. So these are my research aims. So my third one was to invest in diverse knowledge dissemination strategies. What this means is to invest in a variety of strategies to inform the community about science. And so this aim got cut because of that word. So in some cases, it's clumsy, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So this is a slide that shows there's many versions of this out there, but as we're experiencing these cuts, we've really been just kind of crowdsourcing the words that are getting flagged in the review process that lead to the loss of funding. So either the cutting and like I said before, I've gotten programs and people cut, or the overall pulling of the grant. And these are some of the words. Some of the words are words we just use in science all the time. And then you can see some of the words represent people, identities. You might notice the last word on this list is women. So I don't fully understand that, but I think it's a study that just focuses on women, excludes men, and therefore that might be considered problematic. So I just want to end with kind of talking about what Tim said about what's happening in the university. I think that this is a really difficult time for us. Not only, I've lost 30% of my salary, so figuring out how to deal with that, but also just wanting the university to stand up in light of these cuts. And so I know Tim shared that Northwestern University lost a lot of money. I can't remember exactly what you said, Tim, but they also have paid fines to the federal government for research that had already been approved and restored. The same thing happened with Columbia. I understand the University of Illinois Chicago is not Northwestern and not Columbia, but this is a real problem when the university kind of complies, I think, with this kind of extortion. So paying fees on research that has already been funded. And just a note on the funding process, and this speaks to something that Tim said earlier, but when we get funding for our research, the process is so rigorous and so detailed. And we are getting funding based on scientific merit. And so for our funding to be pulled and then for fees to have to be paid back with having nothing to do with scientific merit is really quite confusing, as is the idea that our grant could be cut at any time because of it may or may not align with agency priorities, which seem to be in flux, not scientific merit. So we're just not used to this. I think I just wanted to echo what Tim had said. The other thing that's happening is at the university, because of this executive order on diversity, equity, and inclusion, is a lot of renaming and reorganizing. So I should have an extra bullet here. But since last January, since January 20th, when the executive order was issued, 181 colleges have either closed or renamed their diversity, equity, and inclusion offices. Ours happened last week, Tim, maybe the week before. So our Office for the Vice Chancellor of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion is now being renamed the Office of Engagement. What the universities are trying to do is to avoid fees for being out of compliance with the executive order on DEI. And so they're replacing diversity, equity, and inclusion with words like engagement or culture or community or opportunity or belonging. I'm just raising a concern about this because I think that those words aren't the same as diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that it took universities a long time to name a commitment to equity and justice. And I think this shifting to talk about, not inclusion, but opportunity, or, not diversity, but community generically, it raises some concerns for me. And just another example, I know last week, University of Alabama ended 2 student-run magazines because they were perceived to be out of compliance with the guidance and what is considered unlawful discrimination. And so this raises some First Amendment concerns. And I think as faculty, we're looking for our university leadership to really stand up to these kinds of things that are unprecedented. We haven't seen things like this before. So I think I will end so that we can answer some questions. But I did want to say, I thought that was really compelling, Tim, for you talking about the person in your lab who feels terrified. And I think I just want to say I do research in Chicago community areas with people most impacted by what we call systems of oppression. So systems that advantage some and disadvantage others. And there's just a lot of terror happening. So while I said I don't run a research lab that's kind of what you typically think of, like white coats. I run a research lab with students and community partners, and there is just a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear. So again, thank you so much for listening to me.
So thank you for sharing all of that information. And so we have some questions in the chat. Actually, I put those questions in there, and with our group, I think if anybody wants to just make some comments, see, I told my daughter that I was doing this, and she calls me anyway. So that we can just have an open discussion about these items. So first of all, here I'm going to remove my pen so I can just be with the group. And the first question I had was, is there any possibility that the billionaire tech folks or the biopharma companies, I mean, they're going to see a loss at some point with the degeneration of the scientific community? Is there any, I mean, I mean, it's just an opinion, but is there any possibility they would step in to save themselves? I mean, where are they going to get their
Yeah,
expertise?
so one way to look at this is very short-term thinking on the part of the people who are making these decisions right now. In terms of whether the billionaires, can take up the slack. So I will say that Bill Gates has a foundation that it does really good work funding some things. There's a Chan Zuckerberg group that also funds some research, but the kind of amount of funding is a small fraction of the funding that's available through NIH, through the federal agencies. So they have to pick and choose. In addition, NIH, NSF, NIOSH, all the federal
Mhm.
agencies strive at least to be a kind of the most democratic system for parsing out funds. So they're funding the best ideas, independent of uh, um, you know, your viewpoint, right? Whereas
Mhm.
the billionaires are going to fund things based on what they think is important, period. And so I think there's a kind of a size, amount of money issue, and then the billionaires are going to fund things they think are sexy or important, and not kind of what the collective thinks is important.
Mhm.
Jeni had some comments about that.
Oh, well, just to add, like, I think previously, we would kind of just raise a concern about industry or corporate funding of research. Like, are they pressuring to have a certain answer? So
Mm.
now to kind of be in like we might have to have industry and corporate fund. It's a really funny place to be.
Mhm.
And I know my research isn't really amenable to, I don't, test drugs, make drugs, for example, but the philanthropic community is trying to step in, but kind of like what Tim said with pharma, like they don't have, the philanthropic community can't fill this gap. Like
Right.
we just can't figure out like who can really fill this amount of research funding that's being lost.
Right. Right. And you would think they'd get a tax write-off for making that type of contribution, so they'd have some self-interest in doing it, but
Yeah, the other issue is that the federal agencies will fund very basic research that solves a scientific question, but isn't necessarily directly linked to a drug or something that a company can make profit off of.
mhm.
Pharma companies are only interested in an idea if they think they can make money off of it.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
if it's a great idea, they're not
Mhm.
interested in. I've
Right.
had direct experience with this.
Okay.
And
All right. Well, then my next question was, I was just when you were, and you mentioned this already, the complicity of the universities, and it made me wonder who was on the boards of directors that are going along with this because I don't know if you've heard about the University of at IU, Indiana University, where the governor of Indiana basically took over the university, replaced the board of directors. It used to be that the alums would vote in the board of directors. That is now no longer possible. He put in his own people and cut about 600 programs to make the curriculum the way he thought it should be. So anyway, so he has built in his board of directors who will go along with all of this. So it just made me wonder with these universities that, are complicit, like have they been wishing for this for years? And it's like, oh, now it's come true, you know? I don't know. The
I
question
think
just
it's
came
an
to mind.
excellent question. Yeah, I don't know. I think this, like, I think we do need to research this. It's kind of funny, but we really should investigate. Yeah, who's on the boards and what is their opinion of this? I think, like Tim said, we've been working with our union trying to get answers. I think we've mostly experienced kind of silence, and
Hmm.
that's quite frightening.
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, the university, despite some grand statement, has not been transparent throughout the entire time I've been there in how decisions are made. And so it was really only when the union was formed that they've been forced to do some things that they previously wouldn't do. So,
So then my final question, then we had another question that was shared by the group, but my final question was, so we have the list of banned words and that they say, it has to match their priorities. So we have our current vision of what science, how it functions, its image in the world, et cetera, et cetera. So if that is considered what not to do, what is the new vision of what it should be? What should it be focusing on? If it's the things, there's that banned list of words. It's like, okay, don't talk about that. Well, what are you supposed to be talking about and researching?
that's
Yeah.
a really, oh, go ahead, Jenny.
Well, I was just going to introduce Maha, the agenda. Maha, I'm interested in your
Sure.
answer to this, though, Tim. But we've been really trying to understand Maha, particularly as people who've explored kind of the roots of public health problems for a long time. And I think with RFK in charge, some of the things that are research priorities are chronic disease prevention, which is a very real problem that we have in the United States, obesity, also a problem. But really, research encouraged kind of at the individual level instead of the systems level, if that's helpful. Like I said, like I deal with like the environment systems, and this administration is pushing, I think, narrower research around individual health and wellness.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question that you should ask the leadership of NIH. Um, I have no idea. They have, as the list shows, that they've cut funding programs for almost everything. And so every week, for the past 20 years, I've gotten a list of funding announcements from NIH and other organizations. Starting in February, that stopped. It restarted, but the list of funding announcements, there's almost no new funding programs being released. It's dropped to maybe 10% of what it used to be. So it's not that they're just shifting to another focus. It's just that they seem to be cutting. They're not interested in anything, as far as I can tell.
Okay. All right. Okay. So another question we have is, aside from your student researchers and aides, how are students around campus reacting to these cuts?
Go ahead, Jenny.
Well, there's so much going on campus. I think this is a real concern, but the other concerns that students have are their curriculum. That was terrifying what you said about Indiana University. I hadn't heard that. So impacts on how their curriculum might be reshaped by the current administration. And then, of course, very real concerns about ICE on our campus. So I think most of the student activism that I've seen hasn't been on the cuts to research, but has been on other threats, maybe more directly to the students.
Yeah, I would say for current students, there's a huge amount of concern about, they're in their graduate program doing their PhD research, and there's huge stress about whether there's going to be a job for them, whether this is a good route for them to pursue, and talk to a lot of other students who might consider grad school, in other situations, but are looking at other options. And a lot of the grad students I've talked to who might have considered research, they're kind of all looking at pharma companies to try to find jobs. So yeah, it's huge. It's a big concern.
Well,
Yeah,
so that leads. Oh, go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, I was going to jump
Jenny.
to Kristen's, if that's okay. Tim, I don't know if you saw in the chat, Kristen was saying her son's planning a PhD in biology. This is the question on all of our admissions committees. So typically, in my field, I think this is true in yours, Tim, in biology, we would have a research grant from the federal government that would allow us to hire students on our research projects. In the absence of those grants, we just have fewer and fewer opportunities for PhD students. So I think we accepted 7 PhD students this year, but we have a real concern that we can't continue to pay them. So I don't know. My daughter got into a PhD program too, and the professor said, you've been admitted, you can come, but I can't guarantee to continue to pay you, and she can't afford to pay out of pocket, so she's postponing. So I don't know. I'm wondering what you think about that, Tim.
Yeah, same concerns. It's just a lot of uncertainty. You know, the best advice I could give is just, wherever they're considering going, try to make your best judgment about how secure the funding is, as Jeni was saying, for the program, for the lab that they want to study in, how long they have funding secured for, although nowadays, the funding isn't ever secure for very long. And what their focus is going to be. It said that it's being cut everywhere, but there's clearly things that are more at risk than I think others. So the kind of research I do is in wound healing, and we're trying to figure out how we can improve healing in people with diabetes. So people with diabetes get wounds that don't heal, they get amputations, and that leads to all sorts of bad outcomes. Turns out that the people most affected with these wounds are people that lack access to care, and these are the kind of projects that are being targeted by the administration. So, depending on the type, if it's very basic research they're interested in, it might not be directly targeted, but the funding environment is right now the worst I've seen in 20 years. So very uncertain. People are getting grants still. Some people are getting grants, but it's just a lot less.
Okay. Well, those were our questions for tonight. And so I'm going to talk about our next timely topic in just a second, but I want to thank you both for being here tonight and sharing your insights, because it's incredible. So, so thank you so much for being
So a
here.
couple things you can do is kind of call Pritzker, call your state rep, call your state senator, call your U.S. senators, just make your voices or vote if
Yeah.
you're
Vote,
interested.
vote, vote. Yeah.
Vote.
Yeah,
Yep.
you made this a very real situation for us. So now I'll just mention for everyone here our next timely topic. I'll share a slide here. And our next timely topic is just how secure are your voting rights? And we are co-hosting this with the American Association of University Women on January 14th at 7 p.m. on Zoom. So please look for information about this program in our newsletter, The Voter, and we will also have the registration link there. So, and I believe everyone on this call is a member of the league, but if you're not and you're interested in what we do, please just go to our website and click the join button. So thank you so much for being here tonight, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.